Welcome to The Screen Queen, the show where I'll be talking about your favorite TV show or your favorite movie. You'll just have to listen to find out. This is your host, Samantha Parrish. Hello there, and welcome back to the show. This is your free subscription to talk about fiction. Your host, Samantha Parrish. So when we think of sociopaths in movies, the first that always comes to mind, as the eternal joke goes, that Kevin McAllister is a sociopath on screen. Well, before we had the good son, we had the bad seed. And today I have with me a very special guest, the first guest ever on The Screen Queen, my friend and published author, Ann Lowe. So everyone, please welcome my friend, Ann Lowe.
Hey, I am happy to be here. So I have never heard Kevin McAllister been referred to as a sociopath, but it does make sense. Like, you're not wrong. Like, if you think about it longer than a second, you're like, oh, wait a minute.
It is, oh my gosh, there's been so many jokes about it. They even put, like, a picture of Jigsaw, like, half and half with Kevin McAllister, and I was like, wait a minute, the wet bandit traps, that makes so much sense now. Like, he absolutely is Jigsaw in the making. He's been Jigsaw the entire time, so Home Alone is the prequel to Jigsaw. It makes so much sense now. So much sense.
Home Alone too.
Yeah.
He takes his uncle's, renovated space, and he's like, I'm gonna make this just, a escape room from hell.
Oh my gosh, absolutely, absolutely. Oh my lord. And then the other sequels came through, and it's just like, oh my god, it's just gonna get worse and worse. I'm just waiting to see that. And then we kind of had that with The Good Son, like, oh, so we finally got what Kevin McAllister was supposed to be. And I find it so funny in a way that when I watch The Bad Seed, that The Good Son is inspired by The Bad Seed. I'm like, okay, that makes so much sense. And I find that so funny because in preparation, when we were discussing what movie or TV show we wanted to cover on the show, and you messaged me saying, hey, have you heard of The Bad Seed? And I'm like, oh yeah, I've seen The Good Son. And with it being 7 o'clock in the morning, I'm like, wait a minute. Wait, let me go back and reread this. I got everything wrong. And then reading it, The Bad Seed, and go, okay, that sounds great. Let's get into it. And then after I finished the movie, finding out, oh, The Good Son is inspired by The Bad Seed, I'm like, oh, so I was still technically wrong, but I was a little bit right. I'll take that. But it is wonderful to have you on the show, and you have the honor of being the first guest. It is wonderful to have you on the show. And we actually met through TikTok, and I believe when I was thinking about this morning that we became friends over a video I posted up about internet search history. And it all just went there up from there. We became like Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly from Step Brothers. Like, did we just become best friends? Like, we did.
Absolutely. I feel honored that I'm the first guest. Thank you for having me as your first guest.
And this is going to be a great episode with this great movie that you recommended, all about sociopathic tendencies. And like watching the film, I'm like, wow, this is ahead of its time. And there's a lot of things that I thought about in the process of writing this episode to see the parallels of what's going on today, what kind of echoes today, as well as the way that this film follows the coattails of other films that have also tried to do like psychological analysis, but it didn't really go so well, which I'll get into much later on into our topics. But before I go on to the episode itself, I want to give you the time to talk about your book, Father's Failure. And let me just say, it's a great book. I haven't finished it yet because I'm the world's slowest reader, but it is so smart that I literally sit there and I'm just like, excuse me, I'm getting all choked up already. And I'm like, oh man, I should have paid more attention in school. This book is so smart. I wish I was smart.
Well, thank you. I don't know about so much smart, but I know I have had multiple people be like, hey, you really make me concerned about the level of security in my home. Oh, no. Okay, so Father's
is like, when I was reading your book, it just makes me feel like social chicken of like who's gonna crack first. How is this gonna end? It's like when you watch like Hans Gruber and John McClane, like they're both very smart individuals and they have their own plan, and you wonder like how is this gonna end? Like someone's gotta go down, you know, someone's gotta die hard. Just like when I'm gonna finish your book, I'm like someone's gotta die hard in this book. Like it's gotta happen. It's gonna have like a bloody end, and there's so many interesting things.
They're both ready. They're both ready. Like it's a good tug of war between like, okay, is one of them going to finally say, all right, we're going to have this knockdown drag out now, or is one going to make a mistake that causes it?
Absolutely. You wonder what's going to happen at the very end, and I'm very curious to find out what parts of like Father's failure kind of parallels to the bad seed, and like seeing, because I know there's a lot of like parallels between like the psychological tendencies, just like we see with Father's failure and what we see with the bad seed. And I'm very excited to get into that. And before we officially begin the episode, I'm going to give you the helm to introduce to the Screen Queen audience what the bad seed is. So you get to do your synopsis, because like if I do it, it's gonna be like, and this should happen, and this should happen, and this should hit the fan, and shit went down here, and like it just goes into tangents on this show. And I want, this is your movie, so I would love you to do that.
Okay, so The Bad Seed is a 1956 black and white dark psychological movie where a little boy drowns at a school picnic, and it brings up darker themes of who did it, what happened, accident, murder, and the big overall arching theme is nature versus nurture. Can dark tendencies and murderous genetics really impact and go down the line, or can even bad genetics be overwritten with nurture, or does genetics outplay of any sort of part and it's all nature, or it's all nurture?
It definitely brings up a lot of interesting questions, and when I started watching the film, like it was just handled so beautifully that it didn't feel cliched. Like you completely understood Rhoda's motives, and you knew, like, you didn't really know how it was going to end, but you knew it wasn't going to end well. But it really made you conflicted knowing this is a child, and I'm following this child doing terrible things. That and I like how the movie wasn't afraid to shy away from that, even it being a film in the 50s. Like I think about that with my favorite film, The Night of the Hunter, that I'll definitely be sprinkling in for a majority of the episode, and that came out in 1955. And then, like, The Bad Seed comes out the very next year. People walked out from The Night of the Hunter and all of its narcissistic themes. They're like, oh, no, Carl Jr., Claudette, let's get out of here. We're going to go watch something else. And it's like, why would you bring that to them in the first place? But above anything else, it was a man wanting to murder children. Now, like, the script got flipped, and now we're seeing a child who is essentially going after adults, children, like, doesn't matter. Everyone is fair game to this little girl. And they were able to kind of encapsulate that much better in a way to kind of get everyone acclimated to it and have like a concrete example of sociopathic themes. And I'm very excited to get into more of those themes with you, because damn, there are so many layers, more than a 7-layer dip to this movie and what it does.
Not that she is, for her, it's not about children, adults, whoever, because it's not about the murder, it's about the goal.
The goal.
Like, this is to get me to what I want. And you were in my way, so I moved you out of my way.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. That is definitely who Rhoda is, and what it is that she, just like you said, like, it doesn't matter to her. She's like, you're in my way, I want this thing, has no problem with, like, having to do these very volatile actions that we see as immoral, but for her it's just like, oh, I see nothing wrong with it. I got to have a snow globe. I got to have a medal. Big whoopin' deal. Someone's dead. Oop-de-blue blah. Whatever.
Well, I deserve the medal anyway, so it was mine. Why should he have it? Who cares?
Exactly. And I'm very excited to get into this movie with you, so here we go. With that said, here is The Bad Seed. So, the reason why we're both here is to talk about the sociopathic commentary within The Bad Seed, being this film that kind of became like one of the early trailblazers. I don't know on top of my itty bitty noggin if The Bad Seed was the very first movie to take the helm, talk about sociopathic people, especially with that being in a child. Like, that's just a specific flavor of psychology to just get an audience to be acclimated to. Like, some people are like, oh, whoa, what's going on here? But I love the fact that the movie was able to elaborate in a way that didn't make you feel like you're going to get a headache afterwards. That everything was explained in black and white. No pun intended with it being a black and white movie, but I like the fact that it didn't give you these intense psychological terms and just spoke very casually, like the way that Mrs. Breedlove talked about stuff in her own hoity-toity kind of way, but it was a hoity-toity kind of way that was understandable, that kind of guided us into Rhoda and then set the stage for the future ways that we're going to be having more conversations and having to see more interactions with Christine's father, Richard, and then more stuff with Mrs. Breedlove, and then my favorite psychopath and nightmare fuel, Leroy, and his involvement. There's so many different directions you go with this film. So I want to start the topic off with the question for you to bring everything in. What did you think about Rhoda's sociopathic nature, and what freaked you out the most about her character?
Honestly, I think I've watched too many thrillers and horrors that I'm not horrified by her anymore. But it's just, I really enjoyed for Rhoda her kind of sociopathic swing. She kind of unmasks herself for a moment in time when she's a child, and she'll throw a tantrum and be like, well, it was mine. It was supposed to be mine, or I want this, da-da-da-da-da. And then when somebody, gives her an indication that mask is being taken down, she puts it back up, and she's like, oh, I just love you so. I have the prettiest mommy. And it's just like a neck snap of mood swing for her, because she is a child. She hasn't learned, she's smart enough to come up with plans, but she's not smart enough, or, she's not mature enough, and she's 8 to clean up after herself in a way that won't get her found out. And, especially when it comes to her mother, she knows that she's done enough to where she should keep her mouth shut. But then when, her mom is just like, well, I already know. It's like, oh, well, if you already know, I'll tell you everything.
Exactly. The way that Rhoda has this way to know when to gaslight her mother, but then even when that fails, her mother is just like, yeah, I know you. You're not gonna, put this shroud against me. It's not happening. And then Rhoda does, the backfiring thing of, I love you. You're so pretty. I have the most wonderful mom. And it's seeing Rhoda have this very intellectual side to herself, but it's also sided with these, childlike motives that she thinks, she thinks like an adult, but she still has the same motives of a child, getting these things and being obligated to have this stuff because she's been so spoiled and she gets what she wants. And it's just I will get what I want no matter what is going to happen here. And the thing that kind of freaked me out the most with her is the way that she just talked about Clyde Daigle in the very beginning of the film, where she just talks about Clyde like she's talking about a grocery list, just like no penitence. And that was the most chilling factor, and definitely set it in stage to know, yeah, damn, there's no way she's going to get away with it, but is she going to get away with it? She's already proven herself to what she's capable of and has no penitence for it, and there's so many things that we still don't know about her yet, with some of the things that sort of shrouded at that moment that we explore through Christine, and we're able to kind of navigate through Christine to what she has to do. The one thing that I kind of took away to talk about Christine and Rhoda is how their dynamic changed when the sociopathic tendencies came up. To me, they didn't feel like mother and daughter anymore. They felt like very different individuals for what had occurred, that Christine just can't just like wipe that away. And so many, not many parents, but there have been some parents that are just like, let me just sweep this under the rug and I'm just going to ignore this. It's like, yeah, ignore it. Ignore the problem. That's going to solve everything. That's definitely not going to make more bodies in the backyard.
When it's your own kid, because watching this movie as a parent is very different than it would be. Not to say that it is you're incapable of understanding that because you're not a parent.
Mm-hmm.
Just like watching it before and then watching it as a parent, like that love is completely, like, it overturns your entire world to where, like, and you don't want to see that of your kid. Like, you don't want to be like, okay, there is something wrong with my kid, and it's not fixable.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not fixable in the way of, like, I can't fix that she's leaving a trail of bodies. I can't fix that. The only fix for her is death or institution. And, you know, she's my 8-year-old little angelic child. It's hard enough to really wrap your brain around the fact that murderous children exist,
Mm-hmm.
let alone that it's yours.
Yes.
And, you know, coming to grips with that, especially, you know, the same day, because all of this happened the same day.
I forgot about that, yeah.
And everyone, because she's known, I think it's hilariously ironic that everyone sees it to a degree, but Miss Breedlove, who has been on a therapist's couch just enough to be dangerous, because she knows enough jargon and enough information that she's like, well, let's discuss it. Let's, you know, dive into you, but completely oblivious to this little sociopathic girl that she's lavishing all this attention on. But everyone else sees it. Like, Leroy sees it, her mother sees it, the teacher sees it. The grandpa doesn't want to see it.
Yes.
And the dad isn't around enough to see it.
Mm-hmm. I thought about that a lot. Oh, you're good. You're good. I was just kind of commenting on what you're saying. I thought about that a lot with what you said. We see the truth of what's going on here, and there are so many people, so many players involved here that they're on the cusp of it, but they shy away from it. Like Mrs. Breedlove, like you said, she spoils and puts Rhoda on this high pedestal, kind of making Rhoda even stronger, knowing, oh, wow, Mrs. Breedlove loves me so much. Like, that was, like, no work for her at all to have to use any sociopath on her. That was easy pickings. And, like you said, the dad's not home, and Leroy and Rhoda, they are just, like, cut from the same cloth, and that's even more terrifying that we'll get into in a later point. And actually Christine having to process everything, and she sees the truth, and like you mentioned too with Miss Fern, that she sees it, but she can't say anything quite yet. It's like they're there yet. There's some people that are like, I want to say something, but no one really wants to have to say the most uncomfortable thing. And of course the grandfather, when he stops a couple of points where he's drinking something and he's like, you know, oh yeah, Grandpa knows, he knows. And there's one more point that I wanted to make before we moved on to our next topic, and I've been battling this a lot with what I found out, and I don't know if you knew about this, that Alfred Hitchcock was supposed to direct The Bad Seed, or he was in talk to direct The Bad Seed, and I'm like, well,
Just know that, like, whoa.
yeah, you like the potential behind it, and I do like Alfred Hitchcock. I loved The Psycho. I loved The Birds. He has definitely changed the horror genre, the psychological genre, the Western genre. That's great, but I think it's too soon for him to dive in this film when he would later on go do Psycho. That had to be his specific breed and blend of psychology with Norman Bates. We wouldn't have the Rhoda that we saw in the film if Alfred Hitchcock had the helm. I think it would have been not, it would not really have been elaborated enough to have someone else who could definitely take the helm. It's just weird to know what could have been, and knowing, well, there's no shower scene involved, so I'm not going to go do that. But, for our next topic on the episode, I have been dying to talk about this with you, is I want to discuss Mrs. Breedlove. Like, oh my god, her character, like, it's great, but it's like nails on a chalkboard in all the right ways. Like, when I first started watching it and Mrs. Breedlove is going into her whole psychological stuff, and I'm just like, God forbid this woman existed today. She'd be on all the crime podcasts. Oh, Lord. And the moment for me that really made me hate her character in the way I'm supposed to hate her character is when Christine is visibly, like, not wanting to dive in this conversation. She is not wanting to get involved with it. Understandable. There are some people that get overtaxed and they're like, this is not my cup of tea. And Mrs. Breedlove just goes, Christine, listen. And I'm like, hey, yo, like, yikes. Oh, I've had moments like that where someone does not care where your mental state is at. They're like, you have to listen to me. I'm the one that needs the attention. Like, Mrs. Breedlove is kind of as bad as Rhoda in her own selfishness. Kind of, I don't know if you can see this, but her own degree of narcissism, that it's like this attention.
Sure.
And it's like, whew, man, hell of a character that she is. And before I get into my question for you about what you feel about her, I found it to be a little bit funny that I recognized the actress. And I believe her name is Evelyn Arden. And I kept thinking, I've seen this lady somewhere. She was in The Night of the Hunter. And I was like, oh, wow. So, like, I was just thinking about The Night of the Hunter with her being in this movie. The work is done for me, but there's still much to discuss about her. But I find it so funny, the night and day. Because her character in Night of the Hunter has a bit of the same form of the character she played in The Bad Seed, where she played a woman named Icy Spoon, who's very immersed and enamored with what's his name, Robert Mitchum's character. And she dismisses all that stuff about Robert Mitchum character being a killer. And when the kids come up to her and they say, you gotta help us, I don't think he's good. And she's like, oh, you're just being bad. You guys are being bad children. Now go over there out of screaming distance so I can't hear you when he tries to kill you. You know, that kind of feeling. Like, they're in danger so much. Like, all the adults are kind of useless in The Night of the Hunter. And the danger feels real. And her being at the helm of it, where she's also one of the dismissers, just because it's a man of faith and he knows things and he's going to take care of those kids. And she's like, that's all I need to hear. You would love it. You would absolutely love it. It's kind of like a series of unfortunate events. It feels very much like that. And I discussed that in an earlier episode on the Screen Queen, where it kind of feels like the same cloth of these kids having to run away from someone who's supposed to take care of them that's technically their family member, quote unquote. And it's, but But when I think about that, with the Night of the Hunter coming up the previous year and then seeing the Bad Seed, it kind of feels like a weird sister sequel in a way, to have these two psychological values coming hand in hand with the narcissistic tendencies in the Night of the Hunter and the sociopathic tendencies in there. And we kind of have Evelyn Arden sort of like at this, as this little twilight zone to connect the two together, with the way we've seen these certain examples of people around these specific type of dangerous people. So now that I've gotten my word vomit out of the way, I want to ask you, what do you feel about Mrs. Breedlove? Do you hate her as much as I do, or are you just kind of neutral to her?
So, first off, I love your word vomit. Secondly, no, I don't care for Mrs. Breedlove. Like I said, I think she's been on a therapist's couch just enough to be dangerous, where she understands how to use the jargon and everything, but not in a way that would be helpful. I think she would be more of an actual hindrance. She, in the beginning of the movie, like, she looked at, Leroy splashes water on Rhoda's shoes, and she's like, I was behind you at first, but now I think you're schizophrenic with paranoid tendencies. I was like, whoa, we have no basis for this. What? And then she was talking to Christine about, well, tell me about your dreams, and what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think about this? And then the second they hear that some boy had been murdered or whatever, she's like, okay, well, you're on your own. Bye.
She dips, completely dips. Oh my gosh.
She's like, well, I can't handle this with you. This is just between you and your daughter. Fine, I'm gonna fight. This is Breedlove. And then I just kind of love the character, like in the way of, like you said, she's very selfish, has her own narcissistic tendencies. But I just find it so hilarious that for somebody that talks about diagnosing and being able to see things in people, that she is completely oblivious to Rhoda. She's like, she's an angel sent from heaven. Like, ma'am, don't talk about my baby like this.
Mm-hmm.
And she hasn't even known her that long, from what I gather. They don't really touch on it, but they moved into the apartment. She's like the landlord. So, and then Rhoda immediately falls into it. She's like, Aunt Monica, I want this, and I just miss this book. He's not my favorite, but she is a good, I think, representation of a lot of people that we meet in our lives that are like her.
Absolutely. You said it best. There are so many people that feel that they're, how do I say this? There are a lot of people that we've met that feel like a real life Mrs. Breedlove. Kind of like, as a reference, we've all met a Gaston somewhere in our life. We've seen a Gaston walking down the street. We've definitely seen a Jeffrey Dahmer or a Ted Bundy walking down the street. And having someone like Mrs. Breedlove that is very picky and choosy to what she can give her concern or care for, like, that is just a bad person to have in their life. That they're very seldom to dive into someone's problems. Like, as much as she says, like, oh, I want to help you, but then again, like you mentioned, when the whole thing with Rhoda came up about the child's death, she's like, oh, peace, deuces, love, peace, and chicken grease, I'm out of here. Like, it's terrible. She only wants what caters to her, and when it stops being where she can be the focus or pick at someone's brain, she's like, alright, never mind. I'm gonna come back later when I can pick your brain more, and I can be able to tell you how to live your life. Ugh. Mrs. Breedlove, man. Ugh. Just terrible name and a terrible person. Ugh. Moving on to our next topic. This is the one that was the first that came to mind when I was watching The Bad Seed, is the character of Miss Fern. Is it Miss Fern or Mrs. Fern? I think it's Miss Fern, isn't it? Because I don't think she's married.
I think it's Miss Fern. I think it's her and her sisters that run the school.
Oh!
I think it's a private school.
wow, I like missed that part completely. Then again, it's like one of those films that you can go back and rewatch it and find like new things you missed the first time, um, which is very nice to have that experience for a film to really get a lot of different answers. It's kind of like that movie The Lighthouse, if you've ever seen that, where you can go back and rewatch it and you find like new things to take away from it. But kind of back onto our point, um, I I love Miss Fern's character for the fact that you see she's on the cusp of stuff. She's kind of like our Twilight Zone character in a way, where, or like our Twilight area, where we have Mrs. Breedlove, who's kind of like purposely ignores certain stuff, whatever caters to her, and Christine, who sees everything going on and needs someone that can confirm what's going on here. And Miss Fern, naturally, I thought about this because she's a teacher, so she's not going to ignore certain stuff. She can't just be unprofessional and just go, oh, kids will be kids. Like, I'm glad she's not that type of character to not dive into those things where she can't ignore the obvious, where she has to say things like, well, Rhoda has been hounding Clyde, and something's going on here. I can't ignore that those two were by the riverbank and they weren't supposed to be there. Rhoda comes back, and is it Clyde or Clive? I think it's Clyde.
I think it's Clyde.
Clyde, yes. And Clyde doesn't come back. It's like she also has to present the worst case scenario, something that no one ever wants to have to say, and she had to do that. And it made me think about you and your background as a social worker. Help me by my question here. So how did you feel about her protocol that she had to do with an entire uncomfortable situation to present something that she's going to have to do? She could have run away from it, but she's like, I got to do this. So how do you feel that it worked out, and could it work today?
So in the 1950s, and don't hold me on this because I am not great with history, but in the 1950s, people just didn't get involved nearly the same way that they do now. And as a teacher, you come across a bunch of different kids, and, you know, Mrs. Fern may not have realized to the extent, you know, I can't imagine that she did. Because there were times where Christine was like, well, do you think she has something to do with it? And Miss Fern's like, what? Where Mrs. Fern is like, okay, clearly this is a, you know, stubborn child, and she sees the selfishness, because she touches on it, where she's like, you know, she wants to be perfect, but she's also like prone to temper tantrums and stuff like that. Like, it's hard. I can't imagine, because I have teacher friends too. Like, I can imagine how hard it is to like see certain things, but then again, it's not your child, and what are you supposed to say?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can only get so involved. And even nowadays, like, they wouldn't be able to, she wouldn't be able to get involved because there's not really anything you can say other than like, hey, I think this kid, like, was hounding this other kid, and I have concerns about her behavior. Like, okay, well, what do you want to do about that? I don't know, I just have concerns. Like, you know, and she told the police, because she is, as a teacher, well, nowadays, as teachers, not only are they, you know, good people and caring for these kids, but they're also mandated to say what they know.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think she did the best she could. I think she recognized warning signs with Rhoda, but she also, like Christine brought up, this is her school. Like, she doesn't want stuff to fall back on her school.
Mm-hmm.
And what is she to say? Hey, I think she might have been involved, or something happened and Rhoda was involved somehow. She has no basis for that, other than this kid was seen by somebody else. She didn't see it. I think Miss Fern did the best she could, and she even dismissed Rhoda from the school. Like, she had enough suspicion that she was like, okay, we can't have her in our school and around other
Absolutely. It's like one domino falls, another one's gonna fall, and it's just gonna keep going and going and going. And the one thing I thought about Miss Fern is like, Miss Fern is still in the dark as much as like Christine is still in the dark navigating things through, so she's like doesn't want to be assumptive but can't ignore the obvious and knowing what's going to lead there, and she has to nip it in the bud right there. It's such a critical problem with the death of a child, and knowing like, well, that that's between two children, one of them is dead and the other one won't say anything. We have to make a decision to make sure that there won't be another problem like this, that if it came out that Rhoda did kill Clyde, which we know she did, then that's just going to be having their kids up for the fryer. Who's she going to go after? There'd be another Clyde Daigle that she would go after. And they would just keep going and going and going. And Miss Fern is like, I got to protect these kids. I got to do what I can to protect the school. She has to like make that hard executive decision. And like you said, it was the 50s. No one just like got involved. I mean, I think about that with my grandfather and his upbringing, that no one really like got involved. And even when I went to school, there was some selective involvement with the way that I had bullies coming on to me, and it was always said that oh, I should just ignore it. I'm just like, tell that to Clyde, look what happened to him.
Yeah, I mean, she may not have even thought it was murder. She might have thought that like they tussled and he fell, and Rhoda tried to protect herself,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean she was, but not in the way that she thought.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, just there's different scenarios, but she knew that she was involved somehow.
Yes.
And even Clyde's mom knew that she was involved somehow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. She knew like there had to be something going on, like that mother's intuition, but also that like grief of like wanting the answer. But the grief and the intuition went hand in hand for Mrs. Daigle, even being in a drunken state, that she's like, I know something's going on. I gotta have my answer. And my gosh, Eileen Eckhart did, just side note, the best performance that made me reach for my tissue box. I'm just like, this intense grief that she brought, and it's like a shame that she never got like an Oscar like for that performance. I love everyone's performance. I'm glad that the young actress that played Rhoda got accolades and Christine got accolades, but Eileen Eckhart, that was just like, that was like sideswiped. Oh, that made me very sad. But then again, she did go on to have some great performances, and that is still a staple of her career. Before I go on to our next point of nature versus nurture, there is like one thing that came to my mind that I wanted to say about kind of a similar situation that happened between these two kids years ago. One of them I know is the son of one of my mom's friends, and I'll keep his name discreet and whatnot. We'll say Kid A for my mom's friend's kid, and Kid B for the bad kid. B for bad, why not? And so, Kid A is in the bathroom, washing his hands, and Kid B comes from behind him and chokes him, and the reason and how we know about this, and it's heartbreaking for the way that Kid A had to explain it, the only way a kid knew how to explain it. He said he hugged me from behind and I fell asleep. And he like collapsed, after the kid B was like, oh, shit. And then naturally, kids do what kids do. They flee because of trouble. And so naturally, Kid A's dad brings the thunderous rain to the elementary school. And he's like, what the hell went on here? What did you do to my kid? I want some answers. And the vice principal was like, I'll handle it. Can you put me down? Probably didn't hoist her in the air, but I like to think that. And so they went to go interview Kid B. And all Kid B said was, oh, he's my friend. We were playing around. And they believed Kid B. And unfortunately, because Kid A always said, everyone is my friend, Kid B was able to use that to his advantage to get away with what he did.
No.
It's sick, isn't it? It's very sick. And I like, it's awful. And I thought about that just now with talking about Clyde and Rhoda, with how kids can be so mean to each other, and like what kids will do and how roughhousing they can be. and some of those things that come into play and how they're handled, and there's so many layers and variables to it between like parents, teachers, and whatnot, and the way that like kid A's dad came forth and the vice principal did what she did to talk to the child and get to the answer to know this is for kid A's safety, and unfortunately it just got dismissed so quickly. Thankfully it didn't get worse. There was nothing else I heard after that, so at least it was a one-time thing, but still, it should have never happened. There shouldn't have been a first.
Absolutely. Yeah. Look, I'm a big believer in, like, if your kid fights my kid, I hope you can fight too.
Mm-hmm.
I'm with that dad. I would bring this under a mic because, like, I get playing around. That's fine, but, like, you played so hard that you made him unconscious, which means you did it long enough for him to become unconscious, and now moving forward, we will no longer be allowed together. How about that? That's up to you if you want to punish him, but moving forward, like, these two cannot be together.
Absolutely. That was kind of what worked out for me and some of the bullies I had growing up, that was the way it had to be decided of, like, okay, we'll have this kid stay away, just make sure they stay away at all times. Of course, in my school that didn't happen. Bullies still found, like, loopholes and variables to do what they could. It was just different times back then, whether it's the 50s or the 90s or the 2000s, like, there's still going to be some child that's going to, like, make life miserable and just, like, a tough slice of life to get through to be able to, like, defend yourself or fight back. But I can definitely agree that, ignoring it is not going to do anything. Like, I was always told that ignore it, like, yeah, that's not going to happen. There's no way, especially where we don't know what that child could be capable of, and just kind of playing the cards right and knowing to choose the right adult that's going to be able to listen and know that parents will always find a way through.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, like, kids, you don't want to label a kid necessarily a bad kid.
Yeah.
On one incident because, their little impulses aren't properly, their brains aren't properly, evolved at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Their little impulses sometimes get best them. But by the same token, it's like, okay, I don't want to label this kid a bad kid based on one incident, but we still need to address that this was not okay, and this one incident was not okay. And it's like, yeah.
I absolutely agree. It's like, there can be, like, an extent of forgiveness to know, like, okay, we're not going to label you, but we also have to make a note of this just in case something happens in the future. Like you said, kids will be kids. Kids make mistakes. Kids make accidents. I've done my fair share of accidents, and I had to think about that a lot when I was watching The Bad Seed or thinking about my upbringing. Is like, I am not a parent, and I'm not around kids enough to be, like, a understandable of them, and I've only caught wind from my friends who are parents to know how they handle their situations, or some parents who share their stories on TikTok for how they parent their children to be different than their upbringing. But when you think about a situation like Christine and Rhoda, it's such a different flavor of frustration to know how are they going to get through this. It still feels like a giant echo to know, like, the trials and tribulations of parenting and being presented with situations that you never saw coming, that it still comes down to you love your child, but what can be progressed forward to still see that parent as an individual, to have their own individual ways to counter a problem as being a parent and as a person. Yeah. Excuse-moi. Let me get my thing back up so we can go on to our next topic. And speaking of Christine, she's our next topic. So this whole thing is, like you said, the way that this film is summed up is nature versus nurture. And Christine being a very standout character that we learn a lot through her, despite the fact that we've been giving a lot of information from Mrs. Breedlove, Leroy, Miss Fern, but Christine kind of feels like our definition and our navigator and translator to all of these things. So my question I have for you to open up this topic is, how did you feel about Christine's character changing as her head is racking around the writing on the wall about Rhoda?
I can't imagine being Christine. She has all these dreams throughout her years that she thinks that she's adopted, and then she finds out, oh yeah, you are, and you're also the daughter of a very famous female serial killer. Who was your mother? And then who killed her brother? I think that's like basically implied in there, if not actually said. I don't think they actually say it, but
Mm-hmm.
Christine was just like, all I know is I had one and then I didn't. And then coming to grips with that, and then coming to grips with her daughter, and again, all in the space of like 24 hours. And having to make a plan and a decision, because you can't, I mean, you can't just put it under the rug. Homegirl dropped 3 bodies in 24 hours. No, 2 bodies in 24 hours. She was going to drop a 3rd one, and she had done one a while ago. Like, it wasn't just some, a one-time, she tried to get the medal, and then she murdered another child, and then you're able to sweep that under the rug. Not that she should, but you know what I mean? Like, she can't just say, okay, this was a one-time thing, because the kid keeps doing more.
Mm-hmm.
But also, you love your child, and, you have a life. You have a husband who loves you, loves that child. I can't imagine Christine. That's a rough one. She's the one I feel for the most. And I'm sure you're supposed to
Mm-hmm.
in the movie, but she just...
It is.
I think she handles it. She handles it better than I would. I'd probably be like Clyde's mama and just drink until I could either pass out or figure out some sort of plan. Oh, I don't drink like that. I should not say it that way. But you know what I mean? Like, just... she handled it probably the best way that she could, honestly, giving the scenario.
Absolutely, absolutely. When you were mentioning all those things about what Christine had to do to process, this is what came to my mind when you were given that amazing elaboration, was I thought about the character from Cape Fear. Did you ever see the remake of Cape Fear?
I did, but it's been a minute.
I remember with Sam Bowden and the way that he had to make these decisions for the way that he saw things with the man he's supposed to defend that doesn't have a good intelligence and whatnot, but then like the actions he did to this 16-year-old girl, knowing like, well, that's also really not good. That does not justify what happened here. And he made the incredible decision to bury a report to save this child, knowing like, well, I have a young daughter and I need to set aside the whole legality thing and just make a decision to protect other little girls. Seeing these decisions that people make, knowing there will be like consequences, or there's going to be something that will come back and bite them in the ass, but it's what they had to do that they felt was best. Just like Christine had to do what she felt was best the entire time, with how she basically had to play cat and mouse with her own daughter and having to figure everything out going forward, who she could trust, how she had to word things. And throughout the entire time of the way that she interacted, like this comes to mind from the film where she's talking with Miss Fern, and she did address it like, I'm very sorry about the Daigles, but you present this information to me and I have to live with it. And like, that makes a lot of sense with way everything has a side to the story, that can't just be unturned, that she's willing to understand, she's willing to hear things, but she has to let it be known, hey, I'm the one that is being a part of the accused here, and that affects me as the parent. And then we see things go to hell in a handbasket from there, where things change as she continues to evolve with what she's learned about her hereditary, her bloodline, and the way it's passed down, and knowing, okay, well, the writing is really on the wall there. Rhoda has inherited the genetic roulette from my mother and confirms everything. But I also like with Christine's character that the moments we have with her father, where we get to see her as a daughter for once, that was a big thing for me in the film, to see the way that she talks to her father as if she's kind of like a little girl, and I like how that never changes, to still look up to her father and be like, I need help and answers and everything. And I like how Richard, despite him being kind of a mishmash character, to still sort of ignore the obvious, or dismiss the obvious, that he's like, tell me, I'm your father, I want to hear these things.
Yeah, I see, I kind of have the opposite that you do. I am frustrated with the dad, because yes, he is willing to listen, and yes, you're my daughter, I'm here for you. But she brings up real concerns, and she tries to tread on the idea of telling him, and he completely shuts her down. He's just like, it's all about nurture. Like, you came from this, and you've known nothing but love, and you're fine. And he even doesn't believe it, to the point of, he goes, at the end, he goes to that other guy, and he's like, hey, what? It's all nurture, right? The other guy's like, yeah. He's like, yeah, that's what I thought. Like, I'm like, sir. Like, he completely dismisses her, which shuts her down. She's like, okay, maybe I am all alone.
And it's so sad. It's so sad when we see that moment with Richard where the answer was on his face. The moment that he was taking a drink and stopped, where it's like, oh, Dad knows something. And then in that whole conversation where he's listening, and I'm like, oh my God, Christine finally has someone. And then when he leaves, he's like, nah. And I'm like, Dad, why? Oh, I was like, damn, your own parent, like, dismisses, like, great, now Christine's still more alone. It's such a weird feeling about Richard. And the way that he, like, listens, but the same way, I don't know how you feel about this, but it's just, like, the same shit with Mrs. Breedlove of, like, oh, well, I'm just gonna listen to what's here, but then, no, never mind. It's a child. No, not possible. Like, come on, guys. Yet that one dude, I forget his name. The guy on the couch, like, before, that guy was, yeah, that dude.
He's a very small, minor character, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
Exactly. Thank you for that. I like how we're, like, assessing and to make sure, like, yeah, I know you're talking about, even though people dismiss Christine, I won't dismiss you. But, that dude flat out said, oh yeah, kids can be killers. Like, that was kind of ballsy for the 50s to just kind of express the obvious of what can happen and what has happened, and that can't be ignored anymore. That was very shocking for me to see that in that 1950s film, that they just went ahead and did that and had like a little psychological discussion about that. Even though Richard did dismiss that later on, still at least it was addressed in the film, despite Christine having a lack of moral support.
Yeah, I think that was a really obvious foreshadowing in the movie. I don't know. I try to give the dad some leeway where he's like, you don't want to imagine that your grandkid would do. I don't know. That minor character I think he was just like to further the foreshadowing.
Yes, absolutely. It's a weird feeling about the dad where he's connected to Christine's character and is a part of her arc and everything, but he still is an individual character, and it's just still a weird way to feel about him, because I love the actor. It was interesting to see him in something that wasn't a Western, and also, fun fact, he played the judge on To Kill a Mockingbird. Yeah! Threw me for a loop. I'm like, bro, what haven't you been in? And to see him in this, like, it was a great performance to see him play this dad that has many layers, and the way that we're kind of seeing that hamster wheel go in his mind, going the opposite direction that it should go the last minute. But wow, like, it's a very divisive feeling about the dad with the way that he changes so much in the film, and like how he needs to address it but doesn't. It's a very relatable thing, but it's also kind of a heartbreaking thing. So the next point I want to talk about, this is the one that I've also been looking forward to, is talking about the other baddie in the film, Leroy, or as Rhoda says, Leroy. I'm like, she's got to put enunciation behind it. Like, so fanciful.
I was like, man, you're saying his name wrong this whole movie.
It's like, that's the only amusing thing about Rhoda is the way she says Leroy's name. Oh my gosh. I found Leroy's character to be a very scary parallel to Rhoda. I mean, he even flat out says, you're smart and you're mean, and I'm smart and I'm mean. Like, he's been able to get away from things, to get away with things. And at the beginning of the film, when Mrs. Breedlove says, oh, well, he has the mind of an 8-year-old, but he's able to make a family, so he's got some smarts there. Like, oh, well, he's got a lot more there, and he used that to his advantage. And oof, that was a heavy thing to see, but the way that actor, like, constricted his face to be so evil, I'm like, thank you for being a part of my nightmares tonight, my friend. Thank you so much. Like, I don't know about you, but I kind of felt like he was a bit like a scary version of, it's this kind of, Peter Lorre. And the way that Leroy is just as bad as Rhoda, but it also kind of spelled the future for Rhoda. Like, that's what she's gonna be like one day. She's gonna be Leroy, still gonna be old and finding ways to mess with people and fuck with them and do whatever will benefit him and go about these things. Like, despite the fact that Leroy is shit on, as he should be, for a lot of it, he still is getting away with things. Like, he still has a job. He should have been fired a long time ago, and he's been able to get away with these things. We might not know all about Leroy's life and his family life and what he went through, but knowing he's going to get what he wants, like, okay, well, I can kind of imagine that for myself, to know what he did to his wife or his children or his parents or anything. And Rhoda and Leroy, it's kind of like a very dangerous social chicken game, with how Rhoda's still a child. She freaked out when he had, like, the shoes, or said he had the shoes, and it just made her go, oh my god, you give them back to me, Leroy. And it was like, oof, it was like, to see her sweat, like, it's such a very scary parallel. And to see what is going to happen at the very end, and, like, spoiler alert, like, to see that she had no compensation to, like, murder Leroy, like, damn. Gosh, I should have, I didn't see it coming, but at the same time, like, I kind of did, knowing she was going to kill anybody anyway. Leroy was no different. She was just going to be another piece on the chessboard to knock out.
So, I think Leroy is the other side of the coin to her.
Yeah.
Character, in terms of, like, she's an angelic child, so while they have a lot of tendencies, everyone sees her as this smart angel, probably very selfish and whatever, because she's an only child too. And for the record, my child's an only child. Like, I'm not shitting on only child by saying they're selfish, because they're not necessarily. But I'm saying that that's the stereotype of only children being selfish. It's kind of, they're so similar, but because Leroy is a man, like, and he's got this creepy factor to him that she doesn't have. Like, everyone shies away from him enough. Like, the inner alarms go off where it's like, there's something wrong with that one. But because he's disguised himself as a not very smart man, and I'm just, the mind of an 8-year-old, quote unquote, when he doesn't have that. That's just the role he plays. Is very interesting. And while like is calling to like, they also don't like each other because they are very similar characters. But yeah, he's definitely got a creeping in factor, especially with, like, her pristine husband's gonna be gone, and she's gonna miss him, and she's gonna get lonely, and I'm like, good, Leroy, no sir, gross. I thought it was an interesting little tidbit where he was like, he's been messing with her the whole movie, being like, I know you did it, and then finally looked at her and he's like, oh my god, I didn't actually think you did it, but you did it. And I'm like, Leroy,
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think you're surprised that you're right, but I don't know. I just Leroy is. I think he's an interesting other side of the coin of how she would be perceived had she been a boy. You know what I mean?
You know, I didn't think about that. That if Rhoda was a boy, it would definitely change a lot of things. And like you said, he's a different, like he's the other side of the coin or different side of the coin. it it's hard to trust Leroy because he's not a trustful character from the get-go. So like you said, when he goes, oh my god, I was just joshing with you, I didn't know you actually, they're like, no, you did, come on, like you said at the beginning, you're smart and you're mean, I'm smart and I'm mean, you knew that it was gonna happen. Like a blind and deaf person knew that it was gonna happen. And he just plays everything off. He's as much as wanting the game as she wants the game too, even though they're playing two very different games, but they're also kind of like in each other's way in the game, despite being a different age and having kind of different motives of like what they want, but they still know like they're catching on to each other's bullshit for what's happening here, that he's in each other's way and she's in his way, and it's like, oh, that's got to end right then and there. And the fact that she got away with his murder and it was just kind of like never said again, because he's such an unlikable character that his discussion of investigation was like, oh, well, he burned in a basement, he lit himself on fire, like whatever. That was the easiest murder for Rhoda to get away with.
And oh my god, that was such a horrific way to go.
Yeah.
Like, not to say that the boy's drowning or the old lady falling down the steps is not a bad way to go, but like Christine said, the scream. Like, it was not quick. They got him out. They tried to put him out, and by the time they put him out, he was gone. It's like, oh.
Oof.
And it's the realization for Christine. I think that was the huge turning point for Christine of, there is no coming back from this. Not only is my child doing this, like, that's a malicious intent. There was no like accident of going down the stairs, or the boy said he was going to tell on me, so I pushed him and made sure he didn't come back up. Like, this was, I'm going to light you on fire.
Mm-hmm. It's such an intense, premeditated murder that we're starting to see how well she's thinking of her body count and how she wants to do it. Like, I guess it was a couple months ago at the time of that film that they were in Wichita, and then she pushed a lady down the stairs, so that was like number one with that lady. And then Clyde being number two, like, well, he's gonna tell me, I gotta nip this in the bud and hit him with my little iron shoe, boom, get him in there. And then the hand, the fact that it was on his hands, like, you get the picture without having to see Clyde getting murdered. And this is kind of a side note, but I happen to think about it, is all of Rhoda's murder is like, or murder stuff is all off screen or all mentioned, that we feel for these characters we've never even met. And we are like, oh gosh, so if we're feeling for people we've never even met and we've already met these characters, it's going to be a grisly fate for them. And the fact that we do technically see one of them, even if it's off screen, we kind of feel that through Christine's expressions, where she's like, oh my god, you won't have to see it, you can just know from the look on her face of how horrific it is.
Yeah. Oh.
Oof.
Yeah. I think that's why I was able to see it in high school, is it's all implied, like you said, it's all off screen, so it's all implied.
Mm-hmm.
What happened, and it often, I think that's why, like you said, with Night Hunter, people were walking out. I've never seen Night Hunter, so I could be 100% wrong. But with the bad seeds, with it happening off screen and only being discussed in some details, it softens it for the viewers.
Mm-hmm.
So they're less like, their brain kind of pushes back on the idea of what they're hearing, and so they're able to maintain watching the movie, versus if it was blood and gore, you saw it, especially in the 1950s, where it's in front of your screen in your face, where it's like, okay, this is too much, I'm gonna turn it off.
Yes, absolutely. There's a big thing about how we're able to have this presented to us and how we can digest a lot of these things, and like the way that like you wrote Father's Failure, the way I wrote Inglorious Inc., with presenting these very intense situations where the audience can put the picture together themselves without having to see it. Or like The Silence of the Lambs. We only see Hannibal Lecter for like 20 minutes, and we see a picture of the nurse that he like he went ham on. We don't have to see that scene. We know what happened just with the way Clarice is like, oh, there went my lunch. That's it. And and we don't have to know those things. Well, we know it, but we don't have to see something. It's not going to gross us out or make us uncomfortable to go further to want this answer. Like, we're willing to understand these answers, but we can't be so oversensitized. And the Bad Seed definitely played its cards right to be able to introduce these certain themes of psychological abuse or hereditary stuff with sociopathic nature, that it's all like within the explanations, and we see the actions through the reactions of the other characters, and we're able to venture more into it in a way. Like with Night of the Hunter, that like kind of threw itself in the audience, and it was so intense, whereas the Bad Seed kind of held your hand and showed you these examples of what's going on here, and then you can go further from that and do your own homework and do everything else from there. Crazy stuff, man. It's a great crazy movie in a way. I'm glad that they made that. Now we finally got to have an example for Macaulay Culkin in Home Alone, and when he would eventually be the good son.
Oh my god. I love that movie so much too. I love those Home Alone movies, especially the second one. But yeah, that just puts a whole new spin on Kevin McAllister.
Oh my lord. So for my next topic, I want to circle back around to Father's Failure, and I've always been curious about this with your book, because you know, with the way I wrote Inglorious Inc., that there's many movies and music that played a part to inspire my characters or certain moments. Is there anything from the Bad Seed that really cultivated in your writing for Father's Failure? And you're more than welcome to shout any characters or give any minor spoilers to make your parallel.
So, the Bad Seed, I watched this movie for the first time in high school, and it just, I've always loved the idea of nature, especially after seeing that, and studying psychology in college, and being a true crime person that I am, and I love thrillers, horror, cozy mysteries. If it's got murder in it, I'm probably watching it. I do love the idea of nature versus nurture, and how much it plays into everything. And sometimes there is some scientific research in terms of killers and brain scan, like how much frontal lobe activity there is versus other people's, and then nurture. I do believe that there's definitely some that are made, and there's a wide variety in between. I just kind of love the idea of nature and nurture, how this plays out, and I don't know, like, it's just such a profound idea that I really enjoy the different aspects of that theme and how it's weaved into my book. Now, that's not to say that there was a lot of different
loved it though. I loved every little bit. I love answers that have different like little variables, and like that little A with the dot and the little B with the dot, and that we got to have all those different layers. And I love the answers that you've been giving in this entire episode. It's been absolutely wonderful. And I like that we got to discuss the bad seed and the many of the different layers in that film, and that it like in a way played a part with father's failure, with what you said about that whole idea behind nature versus nurture, that like it'd be cool one day to see like the bad seed along with like your, when father's failure becomes a movie, to be like, well, let's just put this hand in hand. Like, you want to see what happened to Rhoda if she became like an older killer? Well, let's look at father's failure now. Why don't we? Yeah. Let's get those remakes out of the way. Toss them aside. Father's failure is where it's at, buddy. Which, like, that kind of brings it back to my my last topic. This is kind of an open discussion about the remake, so that was kind of a perfect segue. Oh my gosh, like, I honestly don't know how I feel about the remakes. I just got to be honest about it. I haven't seen them after I watched the original Bad Seed because, honestly, what could compare? I saw the ratings, but I did see the actors that played a part in the remakes, and it's kind of weird, but also kind of accurate. Let me bring this up on my IMDb real quick, and I'll bring it up.
I know, I'm going.
We're both on the case. We're both being Angela, just like getting into it. Here we go.
I am a hardcore Googler. Oh, why is Rob Lowe in this?
Yeah, that was so weird. Like, oh my gosh, when I saw Rob Lowe in the remake, I'm like, no, what a low point for him. No, Rob. No, it's so weird to see that. And I think that's a 2018 one, right? Yeah, 2018.
Yeah.
Now
the girl makes sense.
She does.
Plays she's got, when she wants to, she has such a dark face.
She does. McKenna Grace is like, she is like the textbook example of fuck around and find out. Like, she does so many different good kid characters. I was first introduced to her on Designated Survivor, and then it just kind of went for there for a career, and I loved her in a lot of stuff. She was also young Daphne in the Scoob movie, which is pretty cool. But to see her transition to darker roles, like, it's great, and I have no doubt she probably gives a spot on performance, but, like, what can compare to Patty McCormick? And I don't like the fact that they used this remake and stretched it into a sequel of the remake to see what happened after we had the events of that film, which actually played on the way that the original Bad Seed ended. Like, okay, great. I talked about that with Fatal Attraction in my my other episode, where the original ending of Fatal Attraction played a major part in the TV series, but it's like, I don't know, if you can really stretch it out, like, that's great, but it's just going to be an idea that has nothing concrete, and it just doesn't really have the same vibe in comparison as what we see with the original. And, like, valid effort, you know, Rob Lowe is great playing these characters that are dealing with something, but Rob Lowe is not really Christine with the way that we had this happen with a mother and daughter. Having it being father and daughter, like, that's just a little bit weird to me, that it just doesn't have that same translation. It would be like copy-paste if it was a woman, but at least it would still feel like the same ground. It's ground that doesn't have much support.
I'm not upset about the idea of it becoming a dad. That's fine.
Yeah.
I love Rob Lowe.
Me too.
Like, I like Parks and Rec. I like 911, Lone Star. I've watched him in different stuff. There's a lightness to him that I don't know. That's not to say that I'm not going to watch it, because I probably will, at least to try it. Yeah, I don't know that I can see him in this. Now, that's not to say that I won't watch this and be like, just kidding, he did a great job, loved it. But it's going to be weird to, like, imagine.
It is.
Parks and Rec and be like, this is literally my child.
Oh my god, I want to see that. Oh my god, that is so funny. Damn, that is so true. Oh my lord. I mean, I like Rob Lowe too. I love that he can play a different variation, a different layered character every time, whether it's like the stuff he brought to Parks and Rec or 911 Lone Star, or for me, like his earlier stuff like St. Elmo's Fire, The Outsiders, and even one for me, Bad Influence, where he played the bad guy. So it's like cool to see these different layers he can do. But I feel like with the way they had this like story played out and it kind of feeling more modernized, like that kind of hurts the film a little bit in a way. And I don't know how you feel about that.
Differently.
Hmm?
Sorry, I spoiled the 2018 one for myself, which I don't mind spoilers, but it ends differently.
Yeah.
The original too.
It's so weird. As I think I spoiled it before you saw the spoiler, that that's how the sequel comes into play, is the way that they went with the original ending of The Bad Seed to do for the remake of The Bad Seed for 2018, and like, okay, cool. And then we get to see what happens to Emma, that character that's supposed to be Rhoda, which I wish they kept her Rhoda. That would have been great. But I'm not in charge of Hollywood. It's nice that they still continued the idea of like the sociopathic child, which is kind of rare to see in some cases of TV shows, whether it's Criminal Minds or if it's other darker shows that I haven't seen yet, so I can't say for sure like how many are there for examples. But I just feel like that's a little bit strange to do a sequel to a remake. Like, that's very rare to see, knowing you're going to stretch out material that also kind of felt like it was already closed. We knew from there. They could have left it right there and go, oh yeah, she's going to do more stuff. She's just going to keep going and doing everything that is going to benefit her. The writing was on the wall. The one thing I do like with the sequel of the remake that I did happen to catch is that they did have a special appearance of Patty McCormick that played Rhoda. I thought that was very good. Very good. I'm glad they did a good little cameo appearance of like kind of highlighting that giant echo from 1956 into the what was the year that it came out again? 2022. That's impressive. That's such a stretch.
Wow.
Hell of a stretch. The one remake that I saw a snippet of before I did see that they did the Rob Lowe remake of The Bad Seed was the one that came out in 1985. And that one, I did see they did some different stuff. They did keep the same names, thank goodness. So we know who is who and what is what. But the one thing that I took away is they had David Carradine as Leroy. And I'm like, okay, I want to see that. David Carradine does some scary characters before he was Kill Bill. And to see him do Leroy, like, I can see before seeing it.
I appreciate that you said Kill Bill, because I was Googling David Carradine, and then you were, and then you said when he was in Kill Bill, and I was like, I know exactly what you mean now, or who you're referring to now. Ooh, Lord.
There's such an interesting cast list for who they have.
I can see that, though.
Yeah, right?
I can see that, Leroy. Creepy.
Very creepy indeed. David Carradine has like one of those weird faces that's going to be like someone that is going to like mess you up because he's done martial arts movies, or someone like Kill Bill, but then this is like a different flavor of villain that I haven't really seen yet because I'm not too familiar with his movies besides Kill Bill. But to know that he played Leroy, and after seeing Leroy and his character knowing, okay, yeah, Leroy's in good hands to be played by David Carradine, and seeing who they got for the rest of the cast, like, it's impressive that they did find faces that did match the character. And I feel like that was pretty good. Even though I haven't seen it yet, I probably will take a chance on that specific remake, since it's not too far away with it being in 1985, that there's still some relevancy to work with of going, oh yeah, I remember that in 1956, and feels better in its time frame. It's a really weird way to look at these remakes, to see that we have one in 1985 and then we have one in 2018, where it's such a stretch to make this film still have this very loud echo to go back all the way to the 50s and still play on what was the trailblazer, and that they're still doing what they can to play on to one of the greatest child performances ever. Well, I still think it is. There are many great child performances, but Patty McCormack has that certain specific kind of child villain that you don't see too often, and it still feels like examples you can see in a psychology class with the way that her character comes across to see these concrete examples, and they're still doing it for those remakes, and they're doing the best that they can to try out these different plots around the way that Rhoda's character came to be. But it's just still kind of weird to me. Like, I wish they gave it a bit more time because the ratings are a little bit scary, even though the ratings don't really mean anything until you watch it. But it it may have needed a little bit more to help audiences acclimate to a very great movie to know what the intention was.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I don't remember what I was gonna say. I was listening. You did such a great job, like talking about all the different remakes, and I was just listening to you. And I got trained out.
But I can't wait to hear what you have to say about The Bad Seed when you get around to watching the remakes, because it's like one of your core movies, about part of like when you watched it in high school, and then getting to have it a part of your life and rewatching it and it being like that staple. Like The Bad Seed is to you like what The Night of the Hunter is to me, for what that film means to us. And then always see the remakes, I'm like, are you up to par? Can you really do it? I have a specific kind of feeling about this and it has to be fulfilled.
Well, and I mean, with it being in the 1950s, the focus was on the acting. Like, to a degree, they had to overact because they didn't have the special effects, or it was all acting and really picking at the psychological aspect of your brain when it comes to the horror. You know, like Bird, nowadays that wouldn't necessarily be scary, but that is seen as one of the most terrifying movies. And they didn't have, you know, the special effects that we would have now. It would, to me, I'm going to give them a chance, but it's going to be hard to really bring that sort of acting and focus on the nuance versus making her just creepy. It's kind of like the dad in The Shining. Like, if you watch the original Shining movie with, what's his name?
Are you talking about the miniseries?
Yeah, but like the original Jack Nicholson movie.
Yes.
They make Jack, like, Jack starts out looking like, I'm gonna murder my wife. Like, there is a very sinister feel to him. Like, he always looked like, to me, he was like one snap away from this happening anyway. But if you watch the miniseries, you read the book, there's not that. He wasn't like that. He was a good dad that had a problem and had, you know, the component from his dad of violence. His dad was a very violent man, but there was a gentleness about Jack that was translated, you know, that was in the book and then translated in the miniseries that did not get translated in the movie. And that's what I would worry, to bring it all back, that's what I would worry that would get lost in the remake, is the nuance and the acting and that sort of focus versus just making her a very sinister character.
Absolutely. I'm glad that you mentioned The Shining, because it's a great example of like the way we see a certain story and not trying to have the focal point be, oh, well, it has to compare to this actor. Like, that's a subpar, but like it's the character that needs to be represented no matter how famous someone is. Like, they got to bring that character to life. And like you said, like, I love Jack Nicholson in The Shining, but when I looked into the book series, like, okay, yeah, that does kind of deprive that feeling of watching a broken man go insane. And Jack Nicholson was just kind of evil looking from the get-go. And he does a great performance, but then when we got to see the miniseries with Steven Weber, like that really felt on a level that needed to be felt. That, yeah, Steven Weber was like a funny dude, but to see him really take the helm, like, that makes so much sense. To see someone we wouldn't see go into madness, just like it wasn't supposed to be for Jack to go into madness. We really got to descend even more and feel the weight of the chaos and the horror going into that. Just like with the Bad Seed, to see, like, the weight of what's going on with Rhoda.
Have you actually read The Shining yet?
I have not yet. I am ashamed to say that the only book that I read from Stephen King is Dreamcatcher, and that's aliens coming people's asses, and it's great.
You really, like, if you never read The Shining, but you watch the miniseries, you've essentially read The Shining.
Okay, good to know.
Now there is some change, especially toward the ending. Neither ending, like the miniseries and the movie, is correct, quote unquote. Like, it's not the same. But the Wendy translates really well, because Wendy's a strong female. She's not whatever that was in the Jack.
Oh yeah. Poor Shelley Duvall.
Jack was a super gifted, smart, wonderful child. Danny. I think I said Jack. I meant Danny was a smart, wonderful child. Jack was a loving dad. And I just think the Jack Nicholson version really did a disservice there. I'm sorry, we're getting on it.
It's all good.
But, like, the miniseries, if you watch the miniseries, that is the book. And I love the book so much. Like, I reread that book every year. That and Dr. Sleep, I love them so much.
Mm-hmm.
But, like you said, the translation of the character, not the actor.
Yes, absolutely. We had a really good point. We had a good journey to that point, but that also makes me want to say, too, as like a possible thing, I wonder how better it would be for the Bad Seed to just be a TV series. Then we could actually get a little bit more layers, and we could really have something going with the character. Then it doesn't need to just be a remake into a movie and have all those little niches and variables go unexplored or be kind of hoisted so fast that we can't really get through them. Whereas the Bad Seed, we had 2 hours of like going through these variables, and today we have a lot more. I mentioned Fatal Attraction earlier, and I did get a chance to watch some of the remake of the Paramount Plus series of Fatal Attraction, but they explored some of those things from the original Fatal Attraction in modern day. With Bad Seed and what we've been going through, there's so much to explore now. There's so much to put in. There's like a gold mine of potential with turning that into a miniseries.
Mm-hmm. Especially since Bad Seed was a book, or is a book.
Mm-hmm.
It was. I've never actually read the book, but it was based on a 1954 book, and then it was done into a screenplay? Yeah, it's a Broadway play. It's a long-running Broadway.
What? That's crazy. It's a Broadway play?
It says in 1954, the novel was adapted into a successful and long-running Broadway play by Maxwell Anderson into an Academy Award-winning nominated film directed by Mervyn LeRoy in 1960.
That's so crazy. That's like when they turned Roadhouse into a musical. That's just wild. Wow. Yes, they did. They turned Roadhouse into a musical.
I'm going to have to tell my husband that. He loves Roadhouse. Oh my gosh. But yeah, I haven't read the book yet. Now I will.
I'll have to definitely give that a shot as well, and I'm going to have like my ibuprofen nearby to digest it, and I'm going to have a sedative, which is the Grinch's sedative of him getting hit in the head with a little head, whatever it was in that movie. That's what I kind of felt like after watching that film, but I'm glad that I experienced it, and I'm very glad that you mentioned this film to me to be discussed on here. It was nice to take a challenge for a a movie that I normally, not that I would normally watch, but something that is done specifically in that time era. I'm glad that got to be like one of the first like sociopath movies to watch and have a great example by. And to see what that went for the future between the remakes, the way it feels today, and getting to talk to you in the way that you feel about how it has translated over the years and echoed further, and seeing how this played a part in your life. And I'm glad that we got to be here today to talk about the film, and I'm very glad that you got to be the first guest on here.
I'm so honored to be your first guest. Thank you.
It's like the song, like, be our guest, so you got to be my guest, be my guest. But I don't have any gray stuff for you, unfortunately. I haven't gotten there yet. But, before we...
I expect it
Next time, I will get it for you. No problem. I'll get it sent to you in the mail. The exact time we're going to be having our episode, I'm like, go check your mailbox. You might find some stuff in there. But, before we officially end the episode, I want to give you the helm to let my audience know where to find you. Like, where can they find your book? What's going on here? Where else can we find Ann Lowe?
Okay. Father's Failure is available on Amazon. If you're in Georgia, there's a bookstore in Noonan that you can purchase my book. But for the most part, it's on Amazon. It's on barnesandnoble.com. Those are the places it's at right now. In terms of what I'm doing right now, I kind of switched genres momentarily. I do plan on writing another thriller, but I do love cozy mysteries. Again, one of those things where if there's murder involved, I'm probably watching it. I enjoy cozy mystery books and movies and TV shows, and I was like, okay, well, I'll try my hand there. So right now, I'm working on a cozy mystery that hopefully will be a series.
I'm looking forward to that. I've been seeing the updates on TikTok, and I'm just like, look at my girl go. Look at her do her thing. It's going to be so cool to see your further success with your books that you create. Father's Failure being like your debut, and like everything, all roads will lead back to Father's Failure, and we're both like successful authors. We're chilling out on our yachts with our butlers named Juan and Jan, that we're gonna look back and go, remember that podcast show that we did where we were talking about the bad seed? We're gonna have this episode be a time capsule for both of us, and I'm looking forward to your career. And it's been like so wonderful having you as an author friend, and I am so appreciative of your support that you've done for my book, Inglorious Inc., and I can't wait to dive more into Father's Failure and getting to see the cozy mystery series that you're working on. Where else on social media can we find you?
So I am on TikTok for obviously Ann Lowe, and my Instagram is attached to my TikTok, so if you're on there, I have a website, readannlowe.com.
Fantastic.
I have not done an author Facebook at this point in time because I don't really use Facebook that much. That's probably why.
I don't blame you. Me either. It's just a thing. It's a book with a face. It's like, I don't know. I don't like the book with that face. It's just there.
Yeah.
Zuckerberg is weird. Ugh.
And I don't do Twitter, but TikTok I love, Instagram I love, those two places definitely. And I love interacting with people, and I love following other people like Sam. I love all of her Get Ready With Me's and her podcast. I love hearing her talk about her, tattoo shop book that I love.
Thank you.
But yeah, I'm not in a ton of places, but where I am, you can find me.
Awesome possums.
That sounded much cooler in my head.
It is really cool. I can confirm that it is cool on the outside because you're very cool. And I'm glad that you got to be here. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of The Screen Queen. This was a fantastic time to dive into this episode. And in between episodes, you can find me on Instagram at the Queen of the Screen. And if you, it's just like how Ann and I met, if you want to find me on TikTok and find the stuff that I do that Ann mentioned, you can find me at the Mystical Space Witch, and you can find my series Inglorious Inc. in the description box. We've had a hell of a time. This is a great episode. We dished a lot of stuff out. We conquered the world today. So, this is your Screen Queen signing off. Bye-bye! Would you like to say bye, Ann?
Bye!
There we go. So, Ann and I just got done having done a little powwow conversation afterwards, and she said she really enjoyed being on the show, and she was very ecstatic that she got to be the first guest on the Screen Queen. History was made today, and I have Ann Lowe to thank for being a part of that historical moment. But, just like Queen sang until the day he died, the show must go on. And we have to go on to our next episode. But what's going to be interesting about our next episode is we have an event next month. I had mentioned that for August I wanted to do something special, and there's been some people that have known about this, and they have been very excited to see what I will be presenting for Anime August. So, I have with me some anime selections in my selections box, and we're both about to find out what the first episode of the anime series on the Screen Queen is going to be. So here we go. Let me just... Not much to really pile around. I just gotta kind of have fun with it. Alright. That should be mixed up enough. Alright. A piece almost flew my face. That would have been a paper cut from hell. Okay. What have I got? What have I got? What have I got? What have I got? Okay. Okay. That, like, took my breath away. And that kind of has something to do with our first episode. So, for the anime series, on the Screen Queen is going to be Spirited Away. Oh my god. Starting off with a Studio Ghibli movie. Oh, but not just any. That is one of my first Studio Ghibli movies, and I'll have a lot to say about that for that episode. Alrighty, with that said, I'm going to go ahead and close off this episode. Alright, this is your Screen Queen, signing off. And please, if you're going to succeed anywhere in life, don't be a bad seed, be a good seed. That's the only way you can succeed. I'm going to sign off now. That was a terrible joke, and I kind of loved it. Alright? Okay, bye-bye.